Hello, everyone. Hi. Hi. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to the Meta offices. Great to have you all here. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us. We are going to be talking all things customer centricity today, but a little bit of housekeeping before we start. The session is going to run for 2 hours today with a 15-minute coffee break in between. And afterwards, you can join us for a Meta office tour as well. Now, I have been advised that if anybody goes out and roams around, security will, in fact, escort you back here. So just, be careful of where you're going and who you're bumping into. Mark Zuckerberg is not in the office, I can confirm. We're also going to be recording today's session, so if anybody, for any reason, doesn't want to have their photo taken, then please let a member of the team on the side know, and we'll be sure not to share anything. Okay, so my name's Amy. I'm Growth Director at Incubeta, and within the growth team, we ensure that we're doing everything that we can to support our clients' business growth. And this includes talking about customer centricity. We're having a lot of conversations at the moment with our clients on what customer centricity is, how you set the foundations for it, and also how to measure it. So, does anybody know who this is? Yes, Rob, Benedict Cumberbatch, exactly. But he's also Sherlock Holmes. Okay, no one knows where I'm going with this, which is great because let me explain. So if you think about customer centricity as a person, it would be this chap. It would be Sherlock Holmes. He interrogates people to better understand the why and the what and the how. And luckily, times have changed, and we don't need to deploy this old school way of thinking anymore to interrogate to get answers. Instead, we have technology to gather this mass amounts of information and this consumer data. But that's the issue. We actually risk losing touch with reality. We lose touch with this Sherlock Holmes way of thinking. Welcome, everyone. So we have to listen, and we have to understand problems. And we have to create for communication. We have to be true to brand values and provide value at every single touch point across the customer journey. And in today's world, when competition is so strong and the stakes are so high, more than ever, we need to be super authentic. But you're not all here to listen to me, you'll be glad to know. We've got such a fabulous lineup of speakers, and these guys are really at the forefront of what customer centricity means in today's world. So we're going to kick off, first of all, with Charlie on empathy at scale with thick data, followed by Lewis on how diversity unlocks discovery. And after the break, Sophie and Gav will tell you all about the power of your brand and influences. And last but not least, we'll have a panel discussion, and this is going to touch on all things testing and measurement. Sound good? Yeah? Okay, fantastic. So, without further ado, please welcome Charlie.
Thank you, Amy. Cool. Hi, everyone. So, I'm Growth Consultancy Director at Incubeta. Oh, yeah, that will help. Cool. And I'm going to talk for, I think, 10 minutes or so, empathy at scale with thick data. So brands and marketers are obsessed with the customer journey. So every brief we get, brands want to know where the customers come from and where they're trying to get to. And they want to be able to empathize with the customer so they can help them on the way and reap the rewards at the end of the journey. But the journey is becoming more and more unspoken. So the end-to-end journey is moving online. It's becoming less visible and less tangible. So for instance, at the start of the journey, PwC reports that 28% of consumers go to Google and Amazon first for information. And then at the end of the journey, it'll be no surprise to anyone here that in 2025, e-commerce share of retail sales is going to hit around 24%. And marketing has been left to the big data machines. So we're handing control over to the algorithms. But machines have no heart, no empathy, and they miss the nuances. So they tell us what performs, but not necessarily why it performs. So as a result, there's trouble at the bottom of the funnel, and performance marketing looks a little bit like this. So brands are noisy and intrusive. They spam the customer into submission. They don't add value or particularly help the customer along the journey. And meanwhile, there's also trouble at the top of the funnel. So brands are trying to relate to customers through lofty brand purpose campaigns, but they come across as a little bit out of touch and detached from the everyday functions of their product. So in this example, the Unilever shareholders are getting frustrated at Hellmann's talking about its sustainability credentials, rather than potentially the fact that like mayonnaise is good in sandwiches, for example. And then there's trouble in the middle as well. So, or as Google calls it, the messy middle. So brands are struggling to connect the dots between the top and the bottom, and they're struggling because they don't understand that customer journey. So where can we go from here? How can we ensure that brands come across as relevant, informed, well-briefed at every interaction? So for me, it's about showing empathy at scale across the customer journey. So at the top of the funnel, that means understanding the everyday category problems, improving your credentials. At the bottom of the funnel, it's about getting ahead of the questions and helping the consumer overcome the barriers to conversion. And throughout, it's about being value positive and leaving the customer better off than when you found them. But how do you identify the problems and the questions where you as a brand can really add value? So introducing thick data. So thick data is qualitative data which provides insights into people's everyday lives, emotions, problems, helps, and dreams. And thick data comes from something called ethnography, which is the study of observing people's behavior up close. Really, for me, that's understanding where they've come from and where they want to go to. And thick data gives you the answers to the questions that you didn't ask. So on the right here, you've got Trisha Wang, who's an ethnographer. And she actually came up with the term thick data. She does a very good TED talk on it, actually. So she was working as an ethnographer for Nokia in China in 2009. And she was observing some low-income families. And she observed that they aspired to own iPhones, but they couldn't afford iPhones. And she advised Nokia, therefore, to develop a cheaper version of the iPhone to serve that emerging market. So that thick data conflicted with Nokia's big data, big customer data, and they ignored it because it was based on a couple of hundred people's opinion rather than the millions of big data points that Nokia had access to. So Nokia, as we all know, died as a result. I'm not saying that was the only reason, but they certainly missed an opportunity. They missed some important context because they looked only at the big data and not the thick data. But in fact, big data and thick data are perfect sparring partners. So whilst big data is about numbers and machine learning, normalizing, standardizing, and defining, but ultimately looks back, thick data is about people, human learning, stories, emotion, and context, and looks forward based on emerging trends. So in a way, we're all digital ethnographers because thick data in our world is everything from YouTube comments to survey data to website analytics to social listening. Basically anything which can give us additional context and insights on that customer journey. And for me, search is the thickest form of data because, as John Battelle, the Wired founder here says, this information represents a placeholder for the intentions of humankind. So it really does detail where people have come from and where they're trying to get to. So to wrap up, I'm going to take you through a few examples of thick data in action. So firstly, using thick data to understand those everyday problems at the top of the funnel. So to show that you understand everyday problems, you need to talk in your customer's language. And this is a great example from Button Up Box about caring for dogs with diarrhea, which is a everyday problem observable in thick data, which I'm sure many of you, if you have dogs, are familiar with. And by addressing it, Button Up Box demonstrates their credentials in that kind of dog diet space without actually mentioning the product at all. And secondly, understanding those everyday problems from thick data ensures that you stay in your lane. And this is a good example of a brand not staying in their lane. This is a Samsung ad. Many of you would have seen it in the news, I think, from earlier this year. And it basically shows a woman getting up in the middle of the night to go for a run in a city and using a smartwatch. So the intended message, I guess, is that a fitness watch enables women to run in the city at night. But the message that most people would have received was that Samsung are a little bit out of touch with the reality of women's safety. So rather than talking about the many everyday problems which a fitness watch can solve for runners, Samsung stepped out of their lane and burnt trust. So secondly, how do you use thick data to get ahead of the question at the bottom of the funnel? So getting ahead of the question is about moving upstream of the problem. And the problem with performance marketing is that it tends to congregate at the bottom of the funnel, creating that unhelpful noise and repetition. So in this example, you can see lots of brands are talking about the fact that they sell beard trimmers with guards, and it's quite a competitive space. So there's 10 ads and lots of adverts there. But by moving upstream of this problem and helping people overcome the barriers to purchase, brands can move into the white space. So rather than talking about the fact that you sell beard trimmers with a guard, talk about how to trim my beard, or does my face suit a beard, or even do men look better with beards? And that way, you don't need to tell people that you sell beard trimmers because it's kind of implied. And then finally, using thick data to be value positive throughout the customer journey, so leaving the customer better off than when you found them. By providing a clear value exchange, you can ensure that you're being value positive as a brand. So this Huel advert, Huel doesn't say Huel is healthy. It tells you the components of a healthy diet and how Huel supports that. So the value exchange here is that you get this information that protein is good for you. Eggs are a source of protein. 6 eggs gives you the protein you need, and Huel provides more protein than 6 eggs. So again, Huel manages to demonstrate that category expertise and leaves the customer better off for having seen the ad. So to wrap up on a quote, it is good to have an end to journey toward, but it is the journey that matters in the end. That's it. Thanks very much.
Hi everyone, it's nice to meet you all. My name is Lewis and I am a client solutions manager here at Meta. So I work with clients predominantly in the technology vertical across EMEA. And the title of this next section is Diversity Unlocks Discovery. And this is because being more inclusive and representative of different audiences can ultimately help brands to unlock growth. But also it's doing this because it's going to help audiences discover brands better, but ultimately help the brands discover their audiences better as well, which is absolutely crucial to unlocking growth. So what I'm going to be exploring in the next 20 or so minutes are some insights around DEI and advertising, and a few thought starters around those as well. And then I'm also going to be sharing some tips and tricks that I share with my clients as well to help them kind of query, audit, and think more deeply about what they're doing in their campaigns to help make sure that they're as representative and inclusive as possible. But before I start, I want a quick show of hands. How many of you in the last month or so have had an uncomfortable conversation at work regarding DEI in any capacity? So a few hands there. So if you aren't having that conversation at all, or if you are having it and you face some level of discomfort, then there probably is a lot of space to learn more about it in this space. And just to level set the talk that I'm going to give, we are definitely not striving for perfection here. Obviously, a lot of decisions that are made around DEI are made across multiple elements of the business. It's not just marketing and communications teams. There might be product teams, there might be CEOs, CFOs. All of these people have one thing in common, and that's that they have biases inherent in how they think. Some of them might be conscious, some of them might be unconscious. But what's really common here is that if we focus on iterative progress rather than, complete perfection, we're going to be able to make some small step changes that make a larger impact over time. And so what I'm going to be focusing on over the next 20 minutes is just some actionable step changes that you can take to help minimize bias across the campaigns that you're running on Meta. You can still use some of these across other channels as well, of course. And this really kind of factors the whole spectrum of the campaign lifecycle, from the early briefing stages all the way down to kind of the nitty-gritty activation and optimizations you're doing to your campaigns. So we're going to start off firstly with the minimizing bias in representation. Now, what I've got here just to start is a study from Deloitte on the value of diversity in advertising. And what it did was look at the top 50 media spenders in the UK and tease out some key insights around DEI. And what's clear from these insights that you can see on the screen is that there have definitely been positive steps taken to be more representative, but there is still a very long way to go. And I'll dig into some of these insights to explain why. So starting on the bottom left, 92% of brands in this study showed people of color, but only 50% of them were culturally represented by more than their skin color alone. And whilst 43% of brands had at least one occurrence of a senior citizen in their ads, they tended to play more passive roles rather than kind of senior or leadership roles in those ads. And whilst there were 94% of ads the brands had women in a primary role, they still tended to play a stereotypical role. So what this is showing is that brands, still in their efforts to be more inclusive and representative, were still perpetuating stereotypes. And so it's really important then to avoid this tokenistic behavior. We need to kind of think well before we get to a campaign tactical about where these biases are creeping in. And the first tool that I wanted to share with you here is our Creative Shop Beyond Bias Instagram channel. It's a public page, free to follow. Highly recommend you follow it. But basically what it includes is a series of exercises, and they're aimed at brands and their agencies, creative agencies, media, comms, and strategy, to help them kind of take a step back, query their approaches to DEI, and work out if they are actually as inclusive as they think they're being. So I'm just going to really quickly to talk to each of these pillars. So there are 5 pillars which are covered on this Instagram handle. The first pillar is called Earn Your Seat. And this is all around speaking authentically around DEI. You might see around some key cultural moments around the year. Some brands tend to get criticized because they're not speaking authentically. This section is all about kind of querying the language you're using to make sure it is authentic. The second pillar is called Widen Your Impact, and this is all about representation. So sense checking, are there groups that you're over-indexing on and under-indexing on? And if you are, then what can you do to help be more representative? The third is called Break the Mold, and this is all about rejecting stereotypes, be it in your language or in your ideas. The fourth is pressure testing. So basically think, what's the worst possible headline a journalist could come up with this idea, if they were to have one? And basically getting a second pair of eyes on your ideas and sense checking, are they actually inclusive and representative of the different groups of people you want to reach? And then the final pillar is called Include and Execute. This is sense checking whether you're being tokenistic in the way that you cast people in your ads or in the language that you're using, or are you excluding people altogether? So definitely follow and take a look. Like I said earlier, the benefit of this tool is really much earlier on in the process. This is kind of in the planning stage, before you even get to kind of a campaign tactical, but it does also serve a really good retrospective purpose. So I've sometimes used this with clients to go back and look at campaigns they run in the past and use some of the questions we ask on this Instagram channel to say, actually there were some stereotypes there we weren't aware of at the time. So I definitely suggest following this page. And I also just want to nod to creators here. And what we've got on the screen is a study that was done with Kantar and Meta. And this probably won't come as a surprise to many of you, but what it showed is that 63% of those surveyed felt like they trusted influencer messages more than they did a brand's message. This came as no surprise to me, and I think that it actually aligns quite nicely with a lot of the data points we have around the two voices of the brand and the influencer, tending to be more impactful at driving brand metrics than just having the brand's message alone. And of course, that's because creators tend to lend an air of authenticity and credibility to their message. So the next couple of slides I'm going to go into are going to show you how you can harness influencers and the brand as well to help build a more authentic bridge with your audience, but also learn more about them. And this takes the shape in form of a Q&A social listening activation, which many of you will be aware of in some way, shape, or form. We tend to see this, for example, in the technology vertical when there's a new product launch and they're doing an unboxing, or in FMCG or beauty tutorials, for example. But basically, this all hinges around having talent, a creator and influencer do a live stream, promoting that live stream in advance, getting questions from your target audience, then in the live stream, answering those questions and taking new questions from people in the room, and then using that to create some cut downs for organic and paid media. But the value from a D&I perspective is actually knowing what themes and issues impact your audiences the most. So I've just got kind of a bit of a random example I put together here of some of the questions you might get asked if, for example, it was a journalist that's doing the Q&A. But what this really is a really rich qualitative data source. It's actually a social listening feedback loop from your primary audience. So you're actually learning what matters the most to them. And the benefit of this is you can take all of these themes to your strategists, your creative agencies, and influence future comms angles, but also sense check that there might be biases that you weren't aware of in your comms messages and ideas before. So if you work with creators and partners, definitely seek to include this in your activations where it's appropriate. So the next thing that we can all tackle today is how to minimize bias in your targeting. And I have heard so many times in the campaign tactical, we want to reach tech early adopters, silver surfers, frequent travelers, engaged shoppers. Okay, that's really convenient, but actually this segmentation is really steeped with stereotypes, and the issue with this is that you're forced to make generalizations, and that can then influence biases in your targeting, so we need to be really careful here. So a tool I'm sure many of you will be familiar with, but is one of my favorite tools, is the Audience Insight tool. And this is accessed through our self-serve Ads Manager platform. There's a link to it there as well in the deck. Basically, what this tool allows you to do is input a few very loose demographic parameters and some interest segments. And what it's going to do is tell you what the demographic makeup is of that audience on Meta and its family of apps. And we really, really strongly recommend to our clients using this, again, very early on in the process when you're kind of thinking about a brief, because it can help point out where there are some imbalances in distribution, either from a gender perspective or to specific age cohorts. A lot of the time, some interest segments can really heavily skew the delivery, and this often isn't an intended output from the client. So we do recommend doing this very early on in the process. And as a build on this, we also recommend targeting broadly, especially in your brand campaigns, rather than forcing the budget through very prescriptive and overly segmented audiences. And this is because the machine learning can ultimately, based on the creative and the signal which people are putting in, either liking, hiding posts, commenting, going away, clicking on the destination URL and going away onto the landing page, the system is going to learn which people this ad has an affinity with, and it will then go and find similar people. If you're forcing the spend through kind of really heavily segmented audiences on brand campaigns, it's not going to perform as well. So it's definitely worth bearing that in mind too. And just to build on that, I wanted to share with you this graph here, which is just for the UK, but it is similar across the tier 1 EMEA markets, so Germany and France too. But what this basically shows is Meta's reach to underrepresented groups compared to other social channels. So from left to right, you can see almost 90% in the LGBT community and the BAME community, and people with a disability, 83%. And it's a similar picture in the B2B space. So Meta and its family of apps compared to LinkedIn and Xing, which many of you will know is the dominant channel in Germany. Again, amongst senior business decision makers, Meta and the family of apps has amongst the highest reach to these underrepresented groups as well. So worth bearing in mind for your B2B planning too. The third step is minimizing bias in language. So there are so many languages across EMEA, as we all know, but often what I see is that campaigns tend to target just the main language in a market. So for example, in Germany, you're just targeting German speakers. But often what that means is you're missing out really large expatriate groups in markets, and that's a huge missed opportunity in terms of inclusion, but also in terms of performance. So we have a really nifty tool called dynamic language optimization, which some of you may have used before or be familiar with. And this is specifically for performance campaigns. And what it does in a nutshell is basically allow you to build ads in different language variations. That's all it is. So the example we have here has a default language of English, but then you can add in body copies in different languages. And the way that this works is when people set up their Facebook profiles, they set up a default language. Now, if that person's default language is in one of these lists of languages, it will serve that ad to them in their default language rather than English. So again, from that perspective, the campaigns are immediately more inclusive because they're speaking to people in the language they speak. We're not using a presumption here that just because we're targeting people in Germany, they speak German, just as an example. But also, it does have a really positive media impact. It can really increase your audience sizes, which will definitely have an improvement on efficiency. So I've just got a couple of examples here I've pulled out for you. So again, using Germany as an example, if you add in English, Arabic, and Turkish, you can increase your audience by 9%. And in North America, if you run English and Spanish together, you can increase your audience by 10 million people. So there's huge headroom opportunity there in terms of reach, which will really help positively impact your performance. And then just to close on language, words do have inherent gender biases as well. There are some words that might skew more towards one gender over another, or one age cohort or generation over another. So it's really important to kind of check your biases in your language as well, because it can have really subtle nudges, positively and negatively. So I've just included here on the screen an example of a platform called Textio. And this is basically a tool which allows you to identify where there are gender skews in your language, and it can be on your website, in your body copy, on the copy that you're using on top of your creative. This is just one of many examples if you Google it, but it just shows you at scale if you want to do that kind of audit and make sure that your ads are fully representative and inclusive. I would definitely recommend looking into these kinds of tools. So in this next section, I just wanted to focus on some insights around minimizing bias in underrepresented groups. So in the Deloitte study I mentioned earlier, the value of diversity in advertising, it also found that fewer than 1% of the ads which it looked at represented people with disabilities. And that's almost 1 billion people. And considering that 1 in 4 adults live with a disability, that is a huge gap and a missed opportunity. Now, there's another study which is called Meet the 1 Billion, and this is conducted by YouGov and some creators in the disabled arena. And the key stat here is that of those surveyed, only 24% of them felt like they felt fully represented in the advertising that they were seeing. And when they were asked which actions brands could take to improve their perception, the key feedback was on active listening. The brand needs to listen more to us. 36% of those respondents said, can they actually build products and services that are based on our feedback that we give them? So that's pointing to product. Product in the business is not listening. And again, I think this is just to reiterate my point earlier, that DEI goes well beyond the marcoms function of a business. It infiltrates product and other key decision-making processes. So it really does fall on all parts of the business to lean into it. But what can you do about this? So that tool I shared you earlier with the 5 pillars, the bias sense check tool, just go back to that. Query where your business, your product propositions, your marketing strategies are kind of going. Are they underrepresenting certain groups? If so, what can you do to be more inclusive of those groups? And then the final area where you can minimize bias today is in culture. So I don't know if you may or may not have seen these, but we tend to release quarterly or around key seasonal moments some insights reports. So an example might be around key religious moments or sporting moments or other moments which kind of get a lot of attention during the year in a lot of different markets. And the reason that we release these reports is because the activations we tend to see from brands tend to fall into quite stereotypical ones. So we just want to help brands make sure that they're doing better by arming them with some insights. So just keep an eye on your Meta account team from these. I've just got a few examples here from some recent ones we've done with Ramadan at the top, sports, and then Black History Month. But I did just want to close with an example from a recent Ramadan report that we did. And a client of mine, which does really big Ramadan activations, tends to focus more on shopping-led creatives and messaging, because during that time, people are often buying gifts for loved ones. But one of the things we used in this report was CrowdTangle, which is our insight tool, which is basically like our social listening tool. It's looking at chatter across Meta and its family of apps against certain subjects. And what this tool indicated to us was that people are speaking more about kindness, charity, acts of giving. Very few people were talking about buying gifts. So we took this insight to clients, and they actually pivoted their whole creative strategy to focus more on charitable acts of giving, volunteering, and other similar kinds of narratives. So this is just an example of how we've managed to use, again, this very qualitative, rich data source from chatter from the audience to mitigate some of the bias that we were seeing in some of our campaigns. So again, just to reiterate, I would definitely recommend working with your Meta account team on finding CrowdTangle insights. It is literally based on what people are talking about on our platforms. So that was a whistle-stop tour there of quite a lot of different things. But what we've looked at, just to summarize, is just 5 key ways that you can minimize bias in your Meta campaigns. Some more tactical, some more theoretical. But I'm more than happy to take any questions you have later on once all the speakers are through. But thank you so much for your time, everyone.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Lewis. Can I have one more round of applause for both Charlie and Lewis, please? Amazing. Okay, we are going to take a quick coffee break. So if anybody wants to come follow us downstairs, then we're going to kind of break out a little bit, have a break, and then regroup at 3 o'clock, where we'll have the second part of the session. Okay, thanks everyone.
Made my peace with the fears that I hold. They could never understand what it means to be openly told this can't be the way I am. Over that, I have found my way, finally accepting myself. Thinking back, and I wanna say what I'm gonna tell you today. Free love, free love, free love. So don't be afraid, every heart is the same. Free love, free love, free love. The way I feel, oh, I promise it's real.
Please shed a light, but I forgot. You are the one, I miss your soul. I fell in love like, oh my gosh, oh my gosh. And you said you hate me, but I keep on trying. Your heart like a lighter, my heart like a fighter. And you said you hate me, but I keep on trying. My heart's like a fighter, so I'll keep on trying. You say that you hate me, baby, I know that I'm never gonna let you mad. Please tell me that you miss our home. You are the one I want now. It might be dark, it might get cold, but you turn everything to gold. When you're gone, you left me with your soul. It was so pure, I could see it through. Yeah, I wish that we can grow together. Together, oh, never let me go. I just need to close. Never let me go. And you said you hate me, but I keep on trying. Your heart like a lighter, my heart like a fighter. And you said you hate me, but I keep on trying. Keep on trying. You say that you hate me, baby, I know that I'm never gonna let you mad.
I want you to be mine again. Does it make no sense? I need just you and I till the end. But it's not for today. Take me to the sun, babe, I won't return. Will we find a land where we can restart again? Take me to the sun, babe, I won't return. Will we find a land where we can restart again? I just wanna run away, but I'll never go without you. I need to throw it all away. I just wanna be someone new. I want you to be mine again. Does it make no sense? I need just you and I till the end. But it's not for today. Take me to the sun, babe, I won't return. Will we find a land where we can restart again? Take me to the sun, babe, I won't return. Will we find a land where we can restart again?
We get almost every night when that moon is big and bright. It's a supernatural delight. Everybody's dancing in the moonlight, dancing in the moonlight. Everybody's feeling warm and bright. It's such a fine natural sight. Everybody's dancing in the moonlight, dancing in the moonlight. Everybody's feeling warm and bright. It's such a fine natural sight. Everybody's dancing in the moonlight. Stay with me, don't leave me here. I don't wanna live like this. Can't you see I'm here, left with all my fears? I don't wanna get used to it. I don't wanna get used to it. I don't wanna get used to it. I don't wanna get used to, used to, used to it. I don't wanna get used to it. I don't wanna get, no, I don't wanna get used to it. I don't wanna get used to I'm still missing you, and you know it's true. I don't wanna lose you. It's another day since you went away. I don't wanna get used to it. I don't wanna get used to it. I don't wanna get used to it. I don't wanna get used to, used to, used to it. Used to it. Used to it. Used to it. I don't wanna get used to it. I don't wanna get, no, I don't wanna get used to it. I don't wanna get, I don't wanna get used to
Okay, ready to start? Yeah. Hi everyone. Hi, me again, me again. I hope you're all feeling really refreshed. There was, in fact, coffee downstairs, which is fantastic. Nice to see you all back, and we've not scared you away. So before the break, we heard from Charlie on showing empathy, linking this big data with thick data to create a really strong response to understanding the everyday problems and getting ahead of the question and being value positive. And we also then heard from Lewis, which was a really inspiring speech about diversity, unlocking discovery. And he touched on a few things about representing bias in targeting, language, audience, culture. And especially, I think for me, the language element really stood out. So I hope that, you're going to be thinking about how you can use this within your customer-centric approaches when you go back to your working world. So now we're going to kick off the second session, and I'd love to welcome Meta's own Sophie Ellis.
That's a terrible picture, so I'm going to skip very quickly on. My name is Sophie Ellis. I am an agent. Oh, it's not skipping on. Okay. I'm an agency partner manager at Meta, and I represent Incubeta among other agencies, and I'm so pleased to be here with you today. I actually have the easiest bit today because I get to talk to you all about brand, and I think you're all marketers. You're probably already brand experts, so it's probably just reiterating what you already know. So, number one, what is brand? So a brand is a collection of associations in our mind. You could also call it perception as well, right? And what makes up these associations? So brands need to be immediately recognizable. So things like logos, taglines, strong colors are really, really critical. But more so than this, they need actual associations as well. So things that associate words and or feelings to create things like safety, innovation, or luxury. Things like I'm loving it, everyone obviously knows. So really sort of that association's created there. So let's align now on what it means to actually then build a brand as opposed to what a brand actually is. So to build brands is to increase the, remember this, I'll come back to it, to increase the, increase the ease with which they come to mind. So Professor Byron Sharp said, the easier the brand is to access in memory, in more buying situations, for more consumers, then the higher the overall mental availability. So that's really the whole purpose of brand building. It's to be mentally available in as many people's minds as possible in order to drive long-term profitable growth. Okay, cool. Hopefully you're all with me. Cool. So the next question is, why should you invest in brand building? You're probably doing a lot of performance activity at the moment. Why should you take that leap and do a more awareness, consideration, preference-based activity? So if we think about the current climate, and if we look back to the last recession in 2008, we found that brands with high brand equity were up to 9 times more likely to be insulated in times of economic turbulence, and they also recover much faster as well. So this is particularly pertinent in today's climate, as we're going into a recession. So really sort of important to be there with your brand presence within this time. Okay, so what is a brand? So the brand offers protection and gives and drives growth. So the first area of this is commoditization. I had to practice saying that a few times. It's a bit of a mouthful. So commoditization is when a brand becomes more widely available. So people may have known them in the past as being unique and a bit quirky and not very achievable to sort of get. And then when they become more mainstream, they're available to more people for a much cheaper price. So in this way, you not only get through to the people that want sort of a cheap product, but you also get through to those people who knew and recognized the brand, the product, as being quirky, unique, and so on and so forth. So that's one benefit of brand. The next is around increased competition. So if you have a product or a brand that has lots and lots of different competitors, products and brands, then increasing brand can really help in this kind of competitive environment to make sure that your brand is top of mind versus that of your competitors. And then the last thing is around saturation. If you buy brand PPC keywords all the time. You're hitting the same people over and over again. You're not growing your audience. You're not growing the amount of people that are seeing word about your brand. So this is equally important as well. And this is the 3 trifecta, I would say, of why brand is so important. Right, so you've probably all seen this chart before. I get asked this question all the time, and I know, you guys probably are asked internally in your companies as well. How much money should I invest in brand versus performance advertising? And the answer to that is 60% towards brand itself, towards long-term sales growth across the course of 5 years, 10 years, and even sort of further than that. And then 40% of your budget should go towards your sales activation, so your short-term sales uplifts. Of course, there'll be differing opinions and differing, you have to assess this based on your specific brand to make really sure. But obviously this, is the gold standard. So the way that I like to compare this is to watering a tree, but also picking the fruit from the tree. If you just pick the fruit from the tree will die because it doesn't have any water. And that's what you need with brand as well. I quite like that. You can use that analogy. Okay. Just moving on. Cool. And then if we go back to that thing that I mentioned earlier around increasing the ease of which brands come to mind, we should also think about this with regards to market share as well. So the brands that come quickest and easiest to mind actually do end up dominating market share as well. So something to add on to the heaping pile of why you should invest in brand. Cool. So now that we've sort of gone through overall marketing approach on why brand is so important, I'll talk a bit about how you can activate it. And you can take these principles on Meta, on other platforms, however you wish. So the value of a full funnel approach. So what this means is, and we encourage advertisers to run brand alongside performance, really have the yin with the yang, whether it's awareness, whether it's consideration, whether it's performance, making sure that you find what works best with the entire ecosystem at play, okay? And Incubeta are amazing at advising around your brand strategy, so you can obviously speak to your reps from there. But this is something we'd encourage if you haven't sort of tested brand in the past. And there are different stages to this as well. So the first stage is build the funnel. So that's really taking the deep dive, jumping into it, testing that awareness strategy, testing the consideration strategy, and so on. And really sort of Salman will love that I'm going to say, putting in a test and learn methodology so that you're really proving what success looks like with regards to this. Then the next step will be improving the funnel, looking at things like, are you adhering to our best practices, which is things like 6+ placements opted into, and broadening your audience as much as possible, and so on and so forth. There's, obviously a complete list of different best practices. So really taking the learnings that you've got in the first stage and then kind of really learning from that and building from it. Again, test and learn methodology. The next bit is around optimizing the funnel, and this is really around what I mentioned earlier around that 60-40%. This is around finding out for sure what does work for your brand with regards to that percentage split between awareness, consideration, performance, and so on. Again, testing and learning. And then the last one is take with a pinch of salt. I'm not going to say, put loads of money in, because obviously I work for Meta, but we don't want you to put money in the platform if it's not going to work for your business. So test different levels of investment and what works best for you. Test going higher, test going lower. See what really works well to deliver those business outcomes for you, okay? So the 4 different stages that we'd recommend. Cool. I have about 20 different case studies that I can pull out as the effect of brand. This is one that I think is particularly impactful. So we found with Pandora, they had a 62% improvement in ROAS. They had a 93% higher reach and 2 times higher brand awareness. Again, we have many, many, many different case studies from brands who have found impact through running full funnel even. So if you've got any questions, let me know. I'll be with the drinks afterwards. Cool. So this is wrapping up the end of my piece around brand. But to summarize, building brand is needed to protect your products and services. Brand building drives long-term growth. And to optimize sale efficiency, all stages of the funnel should be active. Okay? All right. I'm going to hand it back over now. Thank you so much for your time. You gonna go?
Hand turn. You going? No, it's me. Is the mic working? Oh, the mic's working. Hi, everyone. So, you didn't end your slides, Sophie, but it's fine. I'll end them for you. So I'm Gav. I'm senior account manager. Am I? Yeah, senior account manager in Incubeta. So I work in paid social specifically. And today I'm here to talk to you about my favourite topic, which is influencers. My second is skincare. So if you just want to talk to me afterwards, skincare, that's also great. So firstly, I want to kick off, and I can't believe I'm saying it, that we're in uncertain times yet again. We've went through 2 years of COVID, and now we're going into a really difficult time with crisis of living. And it really brings out the worst in marketers, where we start to scurry where to put our spends and how can we maximize returns. But before we start reforecasting, I really want you all to take a moment to think of where your spends are going and how can we use our spends and utilize our brands to drive meaningful experiences. And to get through this cost of living crisis and get through any crisis, brands need to really step up and create meaningful, lasting experiences that fill the consumer with hope, and also give them some value on how to get through these difficult times. And no shock, influencers are going to be key in building these experiences. But before we start talking about how influencers can drive change in marketing, we want to look at where influencers are now. So the pandemic was absolutely fantastic when it came to accelerating how consumers changed their habits when it came to marketing. We saw that influencers changed even faster, and we have now moved away from a time of grid posts. So grid posts used to be the OG of all influencer posts. They guaranteed great reach, great impressions, but consumers caught on to this and have realized now that it's nothing but just a paid ad. So we need to move away from always briefing in a grid post. Now, I'm not saying don't put a grid post on, absolutely put a grid post on, but be more aware of other placements. And that moves us into content that tells a story. So it's so important for influencers to tell the story of your brand. They're going to be your ambassador and the gatekeeper of all brand things. That was a terrible analogy, but we'll get through it. Consumers now want to be told exactly what's happening with the brand, and influencers are great for talking about that. So they want to see more behind the scenes footage of how the content was created, why they're working with that brand, and also how that brand is making a difference in the market. So definitely you want your influencers are now telling more of a story, and we're seeing that across all platforms. And then moving on to the final point now, influencers are now the new storefront. So way back when I started marketing, I was always told that your Instagram first 9 posts was your window into a consumer to follow you and really tap into your brand. That's still true, but it's different now in terms of how influencers use it. The first 9 grid posts are essentially a storefront of how that influencer shops and how their audience shop. So when you're working with an influencer, look at those 9 grids posts and see if that's relevant to your brand. And what is happening, and what has always happened, is influencer was always your add-on. Whenever we did our media plans and planned out all our digital platforms, influencer was thrown in as a nice add-on. That's no longer the case. By the time we finished media planning, the consumer has changed, and it accelerates so quickly. And moving into peak, especially now, the consumer's changing every day. But what changes just as quick as the consumer is our influencers, because they are so on the pulse when it comes to trends and also understanding what their consumer wants. So now what we need is to plan influencer and give influencer their place at the table, and ensure that they have their own KPIs, their own objectives, and for us to really recognize the value of influencers. So there were some recent studies done by Jiansu. I'm going to be talking about it a lot, so get ready for it. But what the NSU has found is what influencers are great at, and it's no surprise that they are great at creating spontaneous awareness. They put your brand in a place where you've never think it's going to appear. They're great at changing brand perception, and I know myself that when I'm browsing social media just out of boredom, if I see a really strong influencer post and it's around shop the look, I automatically switch into buy mode, and my bank account hates me for it. But no other platform can switch you into buyer intent as quick as an influencer can. And then finally, they create a buzz and a sense of popularity. Brands, especially in their organic side, have been great at using influencers to tap into viral content. And that is something that all brands need to be at, especially now when people are kind of worried. You kind of want to instill that fun and hope again in shopping. And I sound like a shopaholic. But the study that was called, but a girl agreeing with me there, so yeah, we'll talk afterwards. That's not just everything. So influencers get great things done when things go well. However, if it goes wrong, people write them off. So it's not enough to understand influencers. It's about ensuring that your customers are familiar with your influencers. So by ensuring that you target the right audience with the right influencer will create a really seamless experience for your shoppers. You wouldn't target men with a dress, so you don't want to target an influencer with something, an audience with an irrelevant influencer. For instance, an influencer recently who is known for creating Get the Looks has done an ad with a sports drink, and I instantly unfollowed because I knew he was being paid for it, and he kind of ruined the authentic moment for me. But what Dentsu have found is with influencers is that TV, influencer alone, and digital all work well in driving brand appeal. It improves uplift across consideration, and it also improves brand engagement. But the final bit where it's just highlighted there shows that when TV and digital are teamed up with a familiar influencer, there is a 13% increase in brand uplift and a 51% in brand engagement. So Dentsu summed this up beautifully as the multiplier effect. And the multiplier effect shows how influencers, when phased across all steps of the funnel, can complement and outperform and also drive more meaningful conversions across your channels. So the multiplier effect is so important to consider especially with peak, when you're planning your above the line. And this is mainly just because we're viewing multiple screens at once. But influencers targeting isn't enough. We need to also start looking at creative. So influencer creative is what makes influencers. I absolutely love finding an influencer with really aesthetically pleasing grids or really funny TikToks. I shouldn't have said that in meta, but it really drives me to follow the influencers. So what we found in the Dentsu project was the multiplier effect study was that 71% of users says that influencer creative is more captivating than TV or any form of digital BAU content. And that's really true, especially with my clients. We always see that UGC and influencer content drives a lot more engagement. And 33% of users say that they are likely to perform an action when exposed to influencer content. And that means that people are really buying into your brand and they're really wanting to get to know your brand more. So that should be a meaningful content action can be a visit to the website, browsing, and then you fall into our retargeting strategies, or you go straight ahead and purchase. So it's a very important element. And influencers need their creative, especially on paid social because it is a creative platform. So how can you get the most out of your influencers? So I have some creative thought starters here. We have integrate brand thoughtfully. Now, I'm not saying brand all your influencer UGC pieces with a logo in the middle because, as Kim Kardashian once said, you wouldn't put a bumper on a Bentley. It'll ruin the aesthetic and people will tie out straight away. You want to do thoughtful branding, and Clinique do it so well. Clinique make sure that their influencer content is all similarly filtered with a nice pale filter and with pops of red, so you know automatically that influencer is working with Clinique without them actually saying they're working for Clinique. You want to mix and match to create aspirational and accessible content. So what we find is that brands either will go really hard on UGC and influencer content and ignore BAU, or they'll go the opposite way and ignore influencer and drive BAU. We need a balance. Aspirational content is all about influencers creating a vibe for the brand, showing how to create looks, how to use the product, how they love the product. That's all aspirational, and it kind of gets you thinking, oh, I want to buy that. Accessible is your BAU content. So what we're seeing is once you watch an influencer ad, if you start to retarget with a BAU creative, your brand is pulled back to the front of the consumer's mind and they're more likely to convert. And it's striking the balance. So again, as Sophie has just been saying, it's all about test and learn. Test the balance. I've been testing influencer creative now for far, far too long. But it works quite well when you do this balance that we go 50-50. It may not be 50-50, it could be 60-30. That doesn't add up, 60-40, there we go. Math isn't a strong point, guys. And then finally, you use real life experiences to showcase your product. So we're all about relevancy, and we all want to feel like that influencer is speaking to us and that they're everyday people. Influencers that use the product, say, for example, Lenovo is doing really well at the moment. They're pushing laptops and they're targeting B2B influencers, so they're showing the laptop while they're working. And that works really well because now you can visualize yourself using the product and using that laptop, so you can sign in on, drive on that. So really focus on getting that bit of real life in, and that will drive your consumers to be more, well, engaged. I've flown through that. Have I? I've flown through that. So I'll do the key takeaways really quickly. But yeah, so as I was saying, influencers will be key to helping brands create tailored and meaningful experiences. So keep that in front. Your meaningful experiences can be anything to your brand, but influencers will be instrumental in driving them. You need to keep influencers as their own channel. Don't no longer just stick them onto a media plan because it looks nice and you're thinking of award season. Target the right audience, and so important. Know your audience, if it's ABC, if it's Gen Z, if it's millennial. How can that influencer impact that? And they may not be massively relevant to your brand, but they'll be relevant to that audience. So if they can get on board authentically with your brand and we can translate that to the audiences, then that's brilliant. And then finally, creative. Creative will always grab attention, but creative will grab attention harder. So make sure that you brief well, brief often, revisit the brief. All about briefing, guys. Talk to me about briefing as well. I can talk about that. But ensure that your influencers are briefed to create really engaging creative that ties in with your brand and creates lasting experiences. So that's me. If you just want to talk about skincare, come on over. Thank you.
Thank you, Gavin. You should have seen security's ears prick up when he mentioned TikTok. That's why they're outside the door, to escort him out of the building at the end of the day. Can we have one more round of applause, please, for Gavin and Sophie? Thank you. Okay, so we're going to jump straight into our panel, and I will let the guys introduce themselves when we're there. This is unfortunately a closed-end panel, so no questions throughout. I know that you're all dying to shout out and answer questions, but obviously everybody will be around at the end. So can I have a huge round of applause for our panelists, please? Thank you. Awesome. Yeah, I'm going to go. So I've got. Brilliant. Hi. You guys good?
Hello.
Yeah. So, yeah.
Good, right. Everyone's mics are working. Fantastic. For those who can't see us at the back, sorry about that. We're a little bit low down here. Okay. Welcome to the panel. Really excited to have you guys here. And, you know, we've discussed a lot about what customer centricity means on a huge scale throughout the last hour and a half. We're going to touch specifically on testing and measurement. Salman, you look very excited about this. Sophie was saying that you are the king of testing and measurement. So, you know, you've got a lot to live up to here. So let's start with this elephant in the room. You know, we've entered the biggest retail period of the year. Budgets are being scrutinised left, right and centre, and a lot of it from the brand advertising lines. So for the rest of this year and into next year, what are the best ways to measure the impact of brand to support these decisions?
Sure thing. Everyone can hear me, yeah? Yeah, perfect. First, to introduce myself. My name is Salman. I work in the marketing science team for UK agencies based in London. So first and foremost, I think we should take a step back and first ask the question about what we're trying to achieve and what are we trying to measure here first. So if it's like measuring for brand outcomes on Meta's platforms, then then what we'd recommend is to use the brand lift solution, as it's based on incrementality, where you'll be able to test between exposed and non-exposed groups on a set of brand outcome questions, or like top of mind awareness, etc. But then you may not have that that hypothesis or to test on brand outcomes, but rather what is the effectiveness of branding or brand advertising on sales outcomes or brand tracking across the media plan. Then we would recommend using MMM or also known as econometric modeling, to find out that effectiveness of advertising across the media plan there. So we would recommend brand lift solutions or an MMM, depending on the hypothesis there.
And I'd agree with that. So that's exactly what we're doing. So from an MMM perspective, we're looking at a range of different brand health KPIs at the moment. So it's the usual stuff that you'd expect around like awareness, consideration, purchase intent. But also there's a load of areas where we're looking to really shift the dial. And so again, we're kind of factoring that into our models. One of the things that I'd suggest is that unless you're a new brand, you probably shouldn't be looking at it any more frequently than every 6 months. We typically will look at it sort of every 6 months. Some brands will look at it every 12 months or every year, just because of the fact that you don't see huge, vast waves of change coming through from a brand perspective. So again, it's something where you'd see kind of gradual changes over time, which is why typically it tends to be a less frequent cadence. Also, brand studies, where you've got the budget running, run a brand study. It's pretty easy to set up, and you can customize your questions so that you're able to get to the crux of whether the campaign that you're running and the creative assets that you've got are actually doing what you're intending them to do. And then another good way of being able to actually track whether or not your brand campaigns are having the impact that you're expecting is looking outside of that. So customer surveys is one way. You can also look at online visits to see whether that's increasing around the period that you're running brand campaigns. And then also share of market is always a good thing to look at as well. Sorry, I should have said who I am. I'm Fran. I work for M&S, and I'm a senior media manager looking at Tresment? I don't know what that is. Tresemme. Measurement and transformation.
Thanks, Fran. Thanks, Salman. And Tom, actually, we had a discussion this morning with a client on measuring O2, O2O. Do you want to speak to that for a second?
Yeah, I mean, so I'm Tom. I'm a brand strategy consultant over at Incubeta. Joined very recently, so probably not a great person to put on a panel to toe the company line. But plenty of opinions on lots of things. So I think just speaking to the original question, obviously that's like the main question. This is the one thing we're hoping to be able to answer in this whole panel. So to answer it straight up, like I think there's so many things you can go into there. But really, I think my sort of one challenge to it, and obviously it's a really silly place to say this, but there's not really such a thing as brand. Like brand isn't like one homogenous thing that you measure in a certain way. It's not like a concept that is the same from business to business. So I'd say if you are going to measure something, you need to know what you measure, and the thing you're going to need to do if you're going to try achieve that goal is to have a really solid strategy which knows what it's aiming to do, and then you can only once you've done that can you start to talk about measurements. So I mean, we talk about like M&S, like does anyone not know who M&S is? Hands up if you don't know who M&S is. So like, we wouldn't run a campaign that's like trying to boost your overall awareness. It's not important. It's not a relevant KPI. So I think when you come to these strategies, you try build what levers you're trying to pull, and then you do a brand measurement strategy that addresses that. And it's very much in a hierarchical situation. So you have like your campaign measures of like, are we buying it? Is it being run properly? Then you talk to things like brand measurement studies, which should be targeted towards those specific KPIs around Facebook's or Meta's suite is really good with this, where you can look at awareness and intent and brand affinity and all sorts of different levels of different types of awareness. And then to speak to that, you have like your effective, in an ideal world, you have your effectiveness layer, which is MMM, it's econometric, geo studies, that kind of thing, where you prove that it works on a business sense. But yeah, I think in terms of like what we were saying there in terms of O2O, like brand is really, really key to that. We don't no longer live in a situation where digital exists over here and offline is another separate thing. People Google things, they Google directions to places, they find reviews somewhere, and then their mate in the pub tells them it's rubbish and it's all broken down. And getting a full picture of that is very difficult. So I think just having a very strategical approach in terms of this is the lever we're trying to pull and this is how we're going to do it is the best way I'd advise any brand to start.
Amazing, thank you. So you said if you're going to measure something, you have to know what you're measuring, which kind of skips the next point that we were going to talk to, but I think let's just go with this. So obviously brand marketing for like a new product or building awareness, we're looking at certain metrics depending on what you are testing for and measuring against. So how do we get that information before signing off on campaigns and sending it out into the world? Or I guess like what's more important is like how do we ensure that brand is part of the plan, even if like new launches or like a brand refresh is at the core of that campaign? Fran, do you want to take it?
Yeah, I'll take it. Why not? So I think it sounds really obvious in terms of like working out what your objective is and then what you're going to measure against that. But actually in practice, not that many people do it. So I think the key thing is to have an overarching business objective that you're trying to hit and then marketing objectives that fall outside of that. And it won't always be a case that you're trying to hit as many sales as possible. Sometimes you'll get certain elements in terms of we're looking to increase consideration by X percentage, or we're looking to increase share of market, for example. And so it's important once you've got that information that essentially all of your media KPIs and campaign objectives are focused around ultimately what you're looking to achieve. But also that sounds it's easier said than done, because it's a case of making sure that everyone within the organisation is kind of aligned to those goals and pulling in the same direction. So you need to get finance on board, the e-com team on board, marketing team on board, all with regards to hitting those same objectives and knowing what you're going to be tracking and measuring as part of your marketing campaigns.
I think it's where certainly like MMM's such a helpful thing to have long term. Everyone's sat in a meeting where someone's gone, yeah, but what's the ROI? And when you are talking about brand in that way, like I understand how marketing teams are comforted by like an ROI figure, and that is like a thing that you would always love to see on absolutely everything. But like we all run performance campaigns that don't have uplift studies, so the ROI is only a number that indicates possibly how well it's done. It's not that true like real world figure. So I think if you have MMM in place or something where you're able to prove real world effectiveness of any campaign, like brand, performance, or anything in between, you're able to have those conversations within your organizations much more effectively. But yeah, you're never going to be able to say we're going to deliver this much brand awareness, but I don't think you can do that in performance either. So it's not necessarily a limitation. I think, yeah, it's just making sure that it's all strategically laddered to a broader view of growth for the business.
Yeah, and I would, if I could add on top, I think
Of course you can.
what's really important about running effective brand advertising on Meta's platform, or generally, is adopting that test and learn type of framework. Mm-hmm. And also, like at Meta, we also recommended, but also some of our partners and have also recommended how you should run brand advertising on our platform, such as having at least 4 weeks or more campaign duration, a weekly frequency of 1 or more. Also going broad, going for broader audiences as well. So that's how we can help to ensure that we make those brand advertising strategies as effective as possible to be part of that media plan as well, I think.
Nice, thank you. Someone mentioned, well, you've all kind of mentioned in terms of, reporting to senior stakeholders, especially like finance teams, and we all in the room understand how difficult that is. Every single person seems to have a different approach to what success looks like. So, when we are running campaigns and they don't perform, depending on what that individual's definition of successful performance looks like, budget could be seen as being wasted. So kind of what is the most efficient approach when it comes to these campaigns?
It's a very good question, and it always ties back to that test and learn type of approach as well. I mean, there was this particular stat, which may not be necessarily related to brand outcomes, but identifying clients who have adopted 15 experiments or more compared to those who didn't, saw an improvement in ad performance as well. So yeah, there could be brand activity or even DR activity for that matter, where through a brand lift or conversion lift, it did not work. But at least you're embracing what works and what doesn't work. So that can help with future campaigns on that front there.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I agree with everything you've just said. I mean, I think, again, there's an important alignment piece to make sure that everyone's on the same page, but not all campaigns are going to work. It doesn't mean that they're a failure. You just potentially might need to take the learnings from that previous iteration and set up another test to look at if you're doing something different, do you see a different outcome? Ultimately, not all tests are going to be successful, and sometimes you do need to park it and move on. But ultimately, I think it's an iterative process, right?
Nice, thank you. Tom, anything to add? Or
No, failure is not a bad thing.
Yeah.
Like all campaigns, all types of campaigns can fail. And I think it's something that we've spoken to a few times here is that there is going to be a lot of pressure to push things into ROI and money drivers as the recession looms and progresses. But I think I can't remember who made the point earlier, but investment in brand at this stage has been proven to make businesses have a better recovery and ultimately gain share.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the reason for that is that everyone's going to be trying to fight over that lower funnel. And if you are able to operate in the upper funnel, you will not see the same sort of inflation that you see in the lower funnel. Inflation's already bad. It could get much worse as everyone shifts all of their budgets into ROI. So I'd really be asking yourselves the questions of considering that may not stay its current performance level, where are the other levers that you can pull? So you start testing them now because you'll rely on them a lot more as we go into the next couple of years.
Yeah, if anyone's interested, there's a load of econometrics and IPA white papers which detail exactly that. So it's about if people start, a lot of advertisers, when there's any downturn from an economic perspective, whether that's a recession or COVID, will automatically knee-jerk out of the market, which ultimately creates an opportunity for a lot of brands if they can hold their nerve and continue to advertise, because the key thing is that demand lessens, cost lessen, which gives you an opportunity really to increase your share of voice. There's been a lot of research that should have been done by the likes of Binet and Field, which has talked about the close correlation between share of voice and share of market, which ultimately leads to growth. So there's a lot of stuff around advertisers who do hold their nerve, ultimately being able to drive growth 2 to 3 years after a recession, as opposed to those who pull out of it and then have to spend more or kind of massively front weight their budgets to be able to get up to the levels that they were at pre-recession. So there's a lot of information around that. I also think brands, it would be foolish to think that brand's not going to be the first thing that a lot of finance directors take aim at, because you don't see an immediate impact, and your profits are being impacted at the time as well. So it would be foolish to suggest that brand would not be the first that would be taken aim at. However, I think it's got a key role to play with regards to keeping that top of mind awareness, growing that long-term growth, and then also making sure that you're conveying key messaging over quite a difficult period. So, for example, you might want to focus on quality or value propositions, which is obviously going to be particularly front of mind for a lot of customers at that time. So, yeah.
You can build a whole brand around value as well. There's nothing just because it's got a sell in either a sale or a deal in it. That doesn't mean it's not brand building. There are a number of ways of building these different things. So,
but there is also a lot of there's a lot of information out there as well about the fact that value is one thing, but I think we need to be quite careful as advertisers that we don't, again, do that knee-jerk reaction of making sure that we're doing loads of discounted products, because, again, that can have an impact in terms of people's perception of your brand long-term, which ultimately won't be helpful. So, yeah.
If I may add one point, one of the levers that would be really important to ensure it's up to scratch is creative as well. We usually see that creative is really important to ensuring that the brand outcomes are as effective as possible as well. I think there was some study across 160 plus brand lists where they found creators through a process of test and learn. They found that they had lower cost per ad recall of 15% and lower cost per action intent of 13% as well. So it's also quite key to ensure that creative's up to scratch, especially in these times as well. Yeah.
Awesome, thank you. I'm going to touch on creative in a bit, actually, because that's a really important point that we kind of need to, we've spoken very much about channels throughout this session. I think it'll be great to touch on creative. Just going back to what Tom said, and I really like the fact that he mentioned that failing isn't a bad thing. So when we're testing something, if it doesn't perform well, it's kind of like, oh, that's a failure, we don't really tend to, as marketers, we just kind of what we should be doing is taking this learning and moving it on. But actually what we don't do is learn from it. We see it as a negative, and it's actually very much a positive. And then talking about the marketing mix. So obviously, we tend to put budget across the whole funnel in order to achieve our objectives, whatever they may be. But we don't really talk about the advertising mix. So just interested to know what your thoughts are about how to test a more diverse approach with the advertising. Salman, I'll come to you first because you're nodding. So I think you can answer my question.
Sure thing. Or I'll try. It kind of resurfaces back to what Lewis and Charlie have mentioned as well earlier on. So like with empathy at scale and diversity unlocks the discovery. And I think what we would say is like on the creative messaging front, there is getting that as closely as possible to the creative itself. So like if that brand outcome is top of mind, make sure that the creative relates to the top of mind as well. And also from the diversity front is ensuring that the media buying is in line with the audience you're trying to capture as well. That tend to happen with like interest targeting, where it can actually skew towards a particular demographic, which you kind of want to unskew that on that front there. So yeah, that's probably me there. But hand over to Fran, maybe.
Nice, thank you.
Yeah, sure. So in terms of the channel mix, if you're kind of adding a new test into your strategy, so whether that's a new partner or a new tactic, I think there's a few different ways that you can prove out whether or not it's effective. The first is that there's numerous studies out there, more studies that you can probably shake a stick at in terms of brand studies. You've got search intent studies as well, which everyone's probably aware of, Google running. And and there's also obviously conversion lift studies if you've also got CAPI set up. If you don't have CAPI set up, that doesn't mean that you can't still test to kind of see if a tactic that you're looking at is successful. So obviously there's A/B testing, and in the instances where that's not available, you can look at pre and post analysis. But that's less scientific because on a week to week or month by month basis, there can be quite a lot of changes that will actually affect whether or not your performance goes up or down. So not the best, but that is something to look at. Outside of that, longer term, you can obviously look at MMM again. It's really important that you work closely with your stakeholders. So whether that's an agency or actually an internal party, it's really important that you can work with them to devise a strategy which gives you the best possible chance of being able to extrapolate that performance from everything that you're running. Key thing there, most important thing to kind of bear in mind is that you need to make sure that you've got a significant amount of budget to be able to actually identify the impact of what it's having. The second thing that you need to look at is probably phasing. So again, if you've got too much information all at one time, it really muddies the water and makes it difficult to actually get a clear read. So that's one thing. And then other than that, you've got the geo experiments as well. That's a really good way of mitigating any tracking limitations and difficulties, but also what Tom was talking about earlier in terms of the ROPO effect of people researching online but purchasing offline. It allows you to get a really clear read on that in terms of incremental offline conversions that are being driven from your activity. Another good thing with geo experiments, and any of those experiments actually, is that they can be used to calibrate your model. So whether that's an online attribution model, or whether that's an MMM, you can kind of use it for that purpose as well to make it more accurate and representative of the incremental lift that's actually being driven from your activity.
Yeah, bang on. I think we always get up here and say MMM because it's the gold standard, but I think it's really important to remember that it takes a lot of investment in time and money into the actually building it itself, but also having a certain level of spend to make it useful. Geo studies are fantastic. Like if you do one geo study in a year that shows you that whatever channel that you do a nice big campaign to half the country, you can prove an ROI. You can take that to your CFO or whoever's like giving you a hard time around media effectiveness, and you can shove it in their face, and it kind of like kills the argument because they're such like good tests that give you that real sort of viewpoint of it working or not. And so yeah, I would say building that in, and I think it's really, I don't know, I haven't seen it on a slide for a long time, but like the Coca-Cola setup of having like a 70-20-10 of like 70% of what works, 20% of something that's a bit new, and 10% wild shots in the dark. Like I think that still stands true. If a lot of you are really focusing on your like performance activity because it's what you do well, that's fantastic. But like start just building in little areas where you can test things. Maybe a little geo test here to work out whether it works, and then that quickly becomes part of your mix, and build it gradually so that everyone in your organization is comfortable with it, and you've got a real sure idea of why you're doing it and whether it works or not.
Yeah, I think the other thing to point out is that they're not that difficult to run either. So again, this is all open source, both through Google and Facebook, that you can run geo experiments. you can either run it through those guys, or if you want to run it separately, you can just use the code essentially and get your analyst to run it. As well as MMM, that's the other thing. So you've obviously got Robin as well, which allows you to kind of run MMM open source. You can get your analyst to run it. Although, as you touched upon previously, setting up MMM is incredibly time consuming. So it's not a task to be undertaken lightly, but that is all feasible based on current solutions in market.
Yeah, that's definitely bang on for sure. And as you mentioned about the calibration of like MMM with GeoLift or even conversion lift, that's definitely what we would see as the North Star from a MMM measurement, like incorporating incrementality to it as well. So that's pretty cool.
Thanks. And just touching on that time sensitive kind of issues, and we'll touch on creative within that as well, because I think, from experience in both in-house and agency side, from a in-house capacity, is very hard to kind of, get creative out the door quick enough to respond and react, especially when testing and making amendments on the back of what the results from those tests are. So something that I think, there can be more efficiencies when it comes to creative and testing for whatever campaign. But, Salman, you spoke about it earlier on, which is, so I think you probably be best to kick off with this, but how do we get more efficient with our creative when it comes to testing?
Oh, that's a very good question. I think with creative, the benefit is that it doesn't have to always go through like those lift type of testing, because it's quite tactical on that front there. It may be just a change of button, or maybe a small change in creative. Using an A/B test on a continuous basis for those very small changes can be done in an agile way. I definitely also think from a XFN perspective, like working with your creative agency or creative partners, is to like have that test and learn approach to say, look, okay, we have creative A, creative B. How does this work there? Oh, you know what? We also found that sound off. When a creative is optimized for sound off, it actually works better. We'll continue that from now on. So documenting that for future would actually help for that creative effectiveness going forwards there. I'll definitely talk a little bit more about study level analyses as well, which I think will be the next questions.
Maybe not. This is all fluid. We're just making it up as we go. Not structured at all. Anybody else want to add to that about the creative?
Yeah, it's obviously expensive, but having multiple creatives is great. I think for certain campaigns, it's much more important than others, particularly in like action and engagement, where the algorithm's doing a lot of heavy lifting as to trying to match up people with the right creative. For, say, like a brand awareness impact campaign, I think it's less important to have multiple because you don't necessarily have that immediate optimization drive. What I would say, and what I always take the opportunity to say in front of any clients, is please make it suitable for the platform. Like, I don't want to see any more TVCs on TikTok, if I'm allowed to mention them. Like, it needs to be sound off. It needs to be appropriate to the audience. It needs to work. You can't sit there with a gun to someone's head and make them watch your ad on these platforms. They have to choose to watch them. So make it engaging, make it fun, use the silly robot voices and the emoji overlays and whatever that makes it feel appropriate to the platform, but like really lean into that. It's very difficult sometimes with certain clients because they want everything to look very nice in the way they want to look. But I think in social media, like you can turbocharge that, like play with the platforms and like work out what works from a customer-centric perspective, not we're going to force our brand down your throat kind of way.
Yeah, nice. I was going to say, like, that's kind of the be all and end all, isn't it, of customer centricity, is making sure that you're relevant and that you're not just using, a message which isn't going to resonate with those individuals. Fran?
I think it's quite difficult to track creative effectiveness, to be completely honest. So I think outside of what you can do within the platforms individually, I think it's really difficult to get a read on it. So we know, again, from IPA effectiveness papers that creative is one of the biggest drivers in terms of commercial uplift. And we've seen like the impact that John Lewis, for example, has seen essentially from running the Christmas ads, which have become sort of part of the cultural fabric of the UK. But I think it's really difficult to feed that in a way where it's completely objective. I've been struggling with that. So if I'm completely honest, outside of looking at what we can do within the platform, it's really hard to get that read from what I've seen.
I think people will be happy that you're not the only one, because we do, like, time and time again, it's how do we measure this, and there is not a straight answer, and there never will be a straight answer. So I think it's comforting for other marketers to know that we're all in the same boat here at the end of the day. And I love how you are, like, basically commissioned by IPA at the moment, so bringing out all the stats. Love it. Okay, last question. And it's quite a simple question, but your answers by no means have to be simple. But what is the next phase of measuring brand advertising, and what is that North Star? Tom, I'm going to come to you first.
I don't think it's waiting for the next thing to come along. I think that it's really, we have all these tools available to us, and I think clients use them to varying degrees of success, but very few people are like nailing it day in, day out. So I think what we've spoke about from the start here, having like a structure in place that asks certain questions, making sure that you have the right studies there to answer those questions, and then having a test and learn approach where you take that information and you change your approach and you improve it over time. I think the North Star should really be like a really solid brand plan for the year. Set out what you think you need to achieve and how you're going to do it, and then at the end of 3 months in, see whether you're doing it. 6 months in, see whether you're doing it. Maybe change it. By the end of the year, it will look completely different, but like at least you've improved your approach throughout the year. So I just say having a collective idea of what good looks like, and then approaching it in that sort of way.
Yeah.
I'd say use data to improve your channel mix, and be mindful of the fact that obviously with inflation as it is, TV is not the be all and end all when it comes to brands. So make sure that you've got a diversified video strategy, and then also the creative effectiveness thing that I spoke about previously, which was really difficult. That would be my North Star. But I don't know necessarily if that's next, because it's as I said, it's really difficult to do unless you can factor in kind of panel-based data, which is quite tricky to get your hands on.
So I think on my side, like, I was split into like 4 things. Like we more had like a quadrant. So like first thing is like what you should be doing now, and then what you should be doing next, and then between looking for brand outcomes and for sales outcomes, and that using brand lift solutions and MMM. That's what I'd be saying. So that right now, test and learn as much as possible on Meta's platform as well as other digital channels. Like wherever possible, you could use first-party solutions or third-party solutions as well, and that would be like the test and learn approach now. What you could look into in future is like is using a study level analysis where it has 2 main purposes. So like one is to generate further hypotheses for further testing. It's like, I know that, I don't know, for example, feed and stories work, but what I don't know is in-stream. Like, does it work or not? Does Reels even work? These are like the hypothesis that you can drive out of it. Or you could also find what is the causal impact of this particular strategy. Like, what was the causal impact of connected voices from a connected brand's narrative there. So that would be like the North Star from a brand lift solution perspective. Right now, like using MMM as well as Fran mentioned as well, like calibrating with GeoLift or brand lift. I think that's or conversion lift, should I say? That's definitely what everyone should be doing now. I think in the North Star of that is looking at the long-term impact of brand advertising. Which good news is that like 3 independent partners have looked into the long-term impact of brand advertising using MMM techniques and found that short-term measurement has undervalued brand advertising. Long-term ROI could be up to 60%. So that's already a big chunk that we're missing out through short-term measurement right there. And I think like there's also a positive contribution on ad spend on Meta side. I think it can range from 42% for CPG to 79% for tech and durables. So I guess taking a step back, we could ask ourselves, why do we even do brand advertising? The main point is through brand building. And the question is, can you measure the long-term impact of brand? So like, can you measure brand building? Yes, you can. And can you build a brand on digital channels, including Meta, and on this paper? Yes, you can as well. So I think or what I would say, that would be the North Star for everyone. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We are at the end of the session with a few minutes to spare. So, thank you guys so much. Like, the best panel talking about something which, you know, is quite a daunting topic for a lot of people to discuss. So can we have a huge round of applause for our measurement and testing panel, please? Thank you. Okay, so that concludes the end of the session. Hope like you've taken some really insightful information away, including going to Fran for any IPA reports and statistics, and also going to Gav if you want the next big influencer on your social channels. We are going to have some networking and some drinks now. If people also want to have a tour of the Meta offices, then we're gathering around that section over there near where Maria is. You can see her waving. This is an opportunity for you to be escorted by security and taken around the office if you are interested in seeing it. But it is a beautiful office, so I do highly recommend it. Everyone's here to chat at the end, so thank you all again for coming, and hope to see you soon. Thank you.
My cigarette burned my finger 'cause I forgot I'd had it. I feel I'm treading water. I don't know. I know I can't control it, but I can't let go. Don't go wasting time. I am on your side. Don't go wasting time. I am on your side. So meet me at the start. Something new. I know we've grown apart. It's time to bloom. I feel I'm treading water.